Will Goldstein here, thekingscourt.com. Just a reminder, if you're interested in these videos, to subscribe. It'll help to draw other people to listen to the videos as well. This video is called The Dark Road to Babylon, the Fallen Queen. So it's the concept of what Babylon is, and I would say that the basic concept behind our ideology behind Babylon is rebellion against God. So there are examples in the Bible. For example, there's the first Babylon would be Babel, and I'll get into that in a moment, which later on became Babylon. And there's other examples that kind of allude to in the Bible of having the symbology of Babylon, say Nineveh or Tyre or Rome. They all have that in common, that they have that ideology about rebellion against God. It's my way over God's way. So, in Babel, the story of Babel in Genesis, pride is the first thing, and that leads ultimately to the rebellion. So they're trying to make a name for themselves, so a very self-centered ideology. God told them to spread out and multiply in the earth, and they decided that it was better for them to ignore what God said, and stay there. And they have stronger forces together. They felt like, who knows what's out there, fear and anxiety. When you're not with God, then you never really know. So he told them to scatter and multiply throughout the world. And so they just basically dismissed what God said and did what they wanted to do, which is essentially what a lot of people in this world do. So it's I guess there's a fear of being overthrown if you step out in faith and trust God. There's always that fear that if you don't trust God, there's always that fear that something's going to happen. So, but basically that means if you're not with God, you're on your own. Which means now you don't have God to help you and defend you. So anyway, it's the essence of it is basically man thinking that they know best for themselves, and they're competing against God and saying, we know better, and you really don't know what's good for us. And, they built their tower trying to get up to heaven to be like gods. And so it's just a basic system that really leads to evil. So next one I'm going to get into is so God really condemns the pride in man, and when they don't follow his decrees, because that leads to sins. And mankind doesn't want God telling themselves that we have to obey you and that we're sinful. A lot of mankind just wants to do its own thing. And, they're really not thankful for the life that God really ultimately gave them. And I think that's ultimately the cause of some of their destruction, is that they just simply are not grateful and giving the thanks and praise to God. So, so there's all kinds of systems alive in the world today. I'm going to bring this over, I can see it a little bit better. So and these are all ways of man saying we know better. God gives life, so what does mankind decide? Well, euthanasia, we know better. So critical race theory. These are just some ideas here. The Pride movement. Abortion, God gives life, men decide when, or women decide when to take it away, or that they don't want the life. God is in control of the climate. mankind is trying to take control of the climate. God decrees there's a marriage between one man and a woman, and mankind wants, in many cases, to have open marriage. God says there's a man and a woman. Mankind, crazy as it is, they have their gender theory. Or God sets up an institution, where we all are equal before God, men and women. However, to make things more peaceful in God's biblical ideology in marriage, there has to be somebody who is ultimately in charge, and that person should be loving towards his wife. But ultimately, in order to keep from there being a lot of fighting and quarreling, there does need to be some kind of hierarchy, and that in God's way is men in a marriage. Okay? It's not that men are any better than women. It's just there has to be some order. So then you have the feminist movement, and you have the transgender movements, and gender identity and gender theory. All these are ways of saying that we know better than God, and we're defying God. There is no ultimate authority. There is no ultimate truth. We get to decide. It's basically relativism. So in the world that's happening, another way of looking at it is there's evil powers and forces that are all joining together because they believe, this is a joke, they believe that with their sheer numbers, like China or whatever, amassing amazingly large military forces, and with their institutions and global institutions and control of the government and control of money and power, and with their nuclear warheads and their bombs, that they can stand up against God. And all God does is he laughs. What a joke to think that they can stand up, even with their nuclear warheads, against God. What a joke the world will see. So, so basically man is exalting himself, like I've been saying, and he's making himself to be worshipped over God. And like I said, man's saying we can do as we please. What's interesting is, in this relativism, you can do anything you want. You can have any religion only sort of, that you want. You can have any identity that you want, or live your life any way that suits you. But the one thing you can't say is there's an absolute truth, and there is a God, and there is an ultimate authority. That's the only thing you can't say. Okay? So do as you please, just don't say there's a God. So the motto is, again, as I said, there is no absolute truth. So basically in this Babylonian system that we're talking about, this Babylonian ideology, it's represented in Revelation especially as a demonic stronghold, a harlot, the whore of Babylon. I'm not going to really get into that. This video is mostly all about the ideology of that mindset of Babylon and the hostility that Babylon and the people that are associated with Babylon have towards God. And so what ultimately ends up happening is, because it's their relativism, you can do anything you want except believe in God, then who's the ultimate person who gets persecuted? Of course, the Christians. That's why it says in the Revelations, drunk with the blood of the martyrs. So there's this rising tide and movement against Christians that's most likely is already happening and probably going to gain force. So you have this cancel culture, and they're mocking us. So basically, if you don't agree with the whole mindset of the powers that be, then the whole idea is that will destroy you. Okay, so you can lose your job, you can lose your money, you can go to prison. All these things are happening. It's basically like a Nazi Gestapo camp. That's basically the institution that's forming right now as they head towards their 2030, and taking over the world. So, and we see it in all kinds of things. The rights of the government that the government is trying to take away from parents. I mean, what I'm trying to say in all this is that this kind of ideology is a highway to hell. That's exactly what it is. And they do it in a lot of different ways. There's seduction of the masses, in which in some cases, even the elect is people who ultimately are saved, get sucked away into this kind of mindset. And so there's different ways that they go about it, So the people who are based on pride, well, then they'll use money, wealth, and pleasure, and comfort, luxury, and the glamour of this world. And even the ones that are on the dark side, that kind of mentality, they get into Satanism. And there's other people about mentalities, they go along with the spirit guides and the mediums. And, so there's... the whole idea is if you join with this group, you can even gain popularity and become famous. And these are all temptations. And then other people are into the magic arts or sorcery, and people who are of a more foolish mindset, they get sucked in by drugs and violence and immorality and perversions and watching sick movies and woke, basically they're woke paganism. That's another way of saying it. But all these people, if they continue in this mindset, are spiritually dead. There's a war of the heart, and it's the wars between love or lust. Love is caring and affection towards God and other people. Lust is all about the craving. And it's not just lust sexually lust, it's lust for power and all the list of all the things that I mentioned in this video. So what is the price that you pay for advancing in this demonic society? Okay, so if you compromise, your ethics, then it's potentially leading towards spiritual death. So the whole idea is it's a test to see whether you will compromise, whether you will give in, sort of like what Daniel was in Babylon, what Daniel was submitted to. Would he give in? Of course, he didn't give in. That's why we read about Daniel to this day. So, and everybody's heard, Jesus basically, what is the profit of man if you gain the whole world but you lose your own soul? So that's the price that people are gambling with. They're gambling with their soul. So you have these divisive camps, and you have the saved, and the saved are trying to help the lost, and the lost either are, in some cases, being saved, or they hate the people that are trying to help them. It's crazy. So, and you have religions on one side, and then you have the institutions on the other. And the religions, there's always a danger of false religions or fanaticism. So the way I look at it is Jesus is the way. Okay, you can't go wrong there. If what you believe in your religion is in contrary to what Jesus is teaching, then that's a fanatic. Okay? So the world is a ticking time bomb. And evil is allowed to continue for a while and do its thing. And God is just waiting for the right time. The world may seem like it's falling apart. And many are going to say, where is your God? But, he is allowing this world to see the consequences of their own rebellion before he finally steps in to save the world. So it's all basically for the greater good. This is the only way we learn, apparently. Regardless of what may happen in this world, so if things do happen and you're a Christian, the Holy Spirit is there with you. And after all, it's really not about just this world, but it's about the world to come. This world is a fleeting moment, a blade of grass withered in the sun, but the next world is an eternity that has just begun.